Let's talk about carbohydrates. So you can think about carbohydrates. You associate them with like sugars, sucrose, fructose, glucose, starch. They're a quick source of energy for your body. I'm just writing quick down here. Quick source of energy. All right. Now, let's first talk about monosaccharides. The reason why these are called monosaccharides is because mono, this means one. Notice how there's only like one block in these molecules. So one quote unquote sugar block is a monosaccharide. If I take two monosaccharides, 1 plus 1 is 2. And that becomes a disaccharide, which we'll talk about later. And if I have more than 2, then it becomes a polysaccharide. Let's first talk about glucose. So this is the structural formula for glucose. Notice how it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. So the formula here is C6H12O6. And the thing about glucose is that it can exist in a ring structure, but it can also exist in a sort of flattened version. Down here. So this is kind of like the unraveled version of glucose. Notice how there's a carbon bonded to an oxygen bonded to a hydrogen. Now, this is something called an aldehyde. Aldehydes have this sort of arrangement where you have the oxygen, you have a hydrogen, and then you just have the rest of the molecule over here that's bonded to. And this is actually why glucose is called an aldohexose. So aldohex, because, well, think about like a hexagon, for example. There's 6. In this case, there's 6 carbons, right? So aldohexose. All right. Now let's talk about fructose. So fructose, it's a little bit different because there's only 5. It's only like a ring that has sort of 5 sides. All right. Now, fructose, what do you notice that's different from glucose and fructose besides the fact that it has 5 here? Well, one thing to notice is that it actually has the same amount of molecules, the same amount of atoms and the same type of atoms as glucose. So the formula for fructose is actually the same as glucose. They have the same amount of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. However, it's the structures themselves that are different. And when you have two molecules that are structurally different, but they got the same molecular formula, those are called isomers. All right. So you still have 6 carbons, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You'll notice how this time, this carbon is double bonded to an oxygen, and it kind of just has 2 other groups, or the rest of the molecules kind of hanging off the rest of the carbon here. So you have a carbon bonded to an oxygen, and you just kind of have the rest of the molecule, hanging off this carbon. That's going to be a ketone. And that's why fructose is called a ketohexose. Ketohexose. All right, the keto comes from the fact that this right over here is a ketone. And the hex, once again, that just comes from the fact that there's 6 carbons. Same thing with the glucose. Now, finally, we have galactose. So galactose is actually really similar to glucose, but there is one key difference that you got to pay attention to. All right. And the thing to pay attention to is carbon number 4. All right. This is going to differ from glucose and galactose. It's only going to be a slight difference, but it's still a difference. Here's the flattened out version of galactose. It is very, very similar to glucose. The key difference is on carbon 4. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we're looking at this section right over here. On glucose, everything would be the same, but it would look like this on the fourth carbon. So on the fourth carbon, you would have your hydrogen and then this OH. While on galactose, it's swapped. So that is the difference that's important to know. That galactose, basically on the fourth carbon, is like swapped. That's actually why galactose is called a C4 epimer of glucose. All right, so this part is swapped with, this part. Let's talk about how do disaccharides form. So an example of a disaccharide is sucrose, and it's made out of 2 blocks of sugar. So 2 monosaccharides, that we've seen before. So how does this happen? This is a reaction, something called a dehydration synthesis reaction. So dehydration, the reason why it's called a dehydration reaction or dehydration synthesis reaction is because, everything's in the name. If you look at synthesis, if you've seen synthesis reactions before, it involves joining things together. So you're joining these 2 sugar blocks to form a bigger one, but as a result, you're actually losing an H2O molecule, right? So one of the products is an H2O molecule that's kind of thrown out of there. So that explains the dehydration, right? Because you're losing water. So that's a dehydration synthesis reaction, and it all involves these edge OHs right here. So what's actually going to happen is you have one hydrogen and you have like this one OH group, and they basically just get thrown out of there. So you can imagine that if I erase this hydrogen and if I erase this OH group, now this oxygen only has 1 bond, but it would like to form 2. So it would form the second bond with the other carbohydrate or the other monosaccharide. And that's exactly what happens, right? So when this H2O gets thrown out of there, now this oxygen, it feels like it has no choice but to bond with the other monosaccharide. And that forms sucrose. So that is just the basis of dehydration synthesis. And you can see this happening in many, many ways. So glucose, that forms maltose. Glucose, fructose, that forms sucrose. And galactose and glucose, that forms lactose. But the structure is the same, or the main reaction, is the same. And you see that on the product side, we're going to be losing water, and it's all going to involve these edge carbons, as we see before. Finally, let's actually just talk about, and before we get into all that, let's just talk about ribose. All right. So ribose is actually, it's also a ring. So I'm going to draw like this. And so it's going to have OH up here, hydrogen down here, and OH down here, hydrogen up here, and then another OH, hydrogen here, and then finally an H and CH2OH. So it's only a 5 ring, right? It's like a pentagon. It's like fructose. And ribose is important. And in addition to that, you also have deoxyribose. So the reason why ribose is important, ribose is an RNA. So ribonucleic acid, right, that contains ribose. Deoxyribose is very, very similar. There is only one difference that you need to know. Let me just copy this. Yes, allow me to paste this. Thank you. There's one difference though. And it's the fact that there's no oxygen here. That's why it's called deoxyribose. It's because it's like you're taking away an oxygen from here. So to sum it up, you have ribose forms RNA and ATP, while deoxyribose forms DNA. And this is a diagram of the ribose and ATP, and you can see that both of kind of the bottom of this, the bottom legs, are filled out with the OHs, which is how you know it's ribose instead of deoxyribose.